The bread was still warm in Clara's hands when Mrs. Thornton's sharp voice cut through the bakery like a whip crack, and in that moment, Clara knew her empty stomach would have to wait even longer. "What do you think you are doing, girl?" Mrs. Thornton descended upon Clara with the fury of a woman who had found her servant committing the gravest of sins. The older woman's face had gone red, her jowls trembling with indignation as she snatched the small loaf from Clara's trembling fingers. "This bread belongs to paying customers, not starving strays I took in out of Christian charity." Clara stepped back, her cheeks burning with shame. It was true that Mrs. Thornton had given her employment and a place to sleep in the cramped storage room behind the bakery, but Clara worked from dawn until well past dusk, kneading dough until her arms ached and stoking the ovens until sweat poured down her back. She had thought that one small loaf, slightly misshapen and unsellable to the fine ladies of Charity Springs, Colorado, might fill the gnawing emptiness in her belly that had been her constant companion for 3 days. "I am sorry, ma'am," Clara whispered, keeping her eyes down. "I have not eaten since Monday, and I thought perhaps this one, since it is lopsided." "You thought wrong." Mrs. Thornton's voice was ice. "If I let you eat the profits, what is next? Should I let you sleep until noon? Should I pay you in gold while I am at it?" She laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "You eat what I decide you may eat when I decide it. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, blinking back tears. She was 22 years old, alone in the world since her parents had died of fever 2 years prior, and she had nowhere else to go. Charity Springs was a small mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains, and jobs for unmarried women were scarce. She had been fortunate, or so she had thought, when Mrs. Thornton had hired her 6 months ago. "Now get back to work," Mrs. Thornton snapped, tossing the loaf into the waste bin with deliberate cruelty. "The banker's wife wants 3 dozen rolls by this afternoon, and they will not bake themselves." Clara returned to the wooden table, her hands automatically reaching for the dough she had been working before hunger had driven her to foolishness. Her vision swam slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. She could not afford to faint. She could not afford to show weakness. Mrs. Thornton would turn her out without a second thought, and then where would she be? The September morning wore on, and Clara worked in silence, shaping rolls with practiced efficiency despite her lightheadedness. The smell of baking bread was both torture and comfort, filling her senses until she could think of nothing else. She had just pulled the final batch from the oven when the bell above the bakery door chimed. Clara glanced up and felt her breath catch. The man who had entered had to duck beneath the doorframe, his shoulders nearly as wide as the doorway itself. He was easily over 6 feet tall, built like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all broad chest and thick arms that strained against the fabric of his worn flannel shirt. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders in waves that looked like they had been tamed by nothing more than his own fingers. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but it could not hide the strong line of his jaw or the intensity of his gray eyes. "Help you?" Mrs. Thornton's voice had taken on a honeyed quality that it never held when she spoke to Clara. The older woman smoothed her apron and smiled, revealing the gap between her front teeth. The mountain man looked around the bakery with an expression that suggested he found the frilly curtains and painted signs faintly ridiculous. "Need bread," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Plain bread, nothing fancy." Of course, of course." Mrs. Thornton bustled toward the display, her hands fluttering. "I have a lovely sourdough, fresh this morning, or perhaps some wheat." "The plain one is fine." He pulled a leather pouch from his belt, counting out coins with hands that dwarfed the small silver pieces. It was then that his eyes fell on Clara, who had tried to make herself small and invisible near the ovens. She saw his gaze sharpen, taking in her thin frame, the hollow shadows beneath her eyes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Something flickered across his face, too quick for Clara to name. Mrs. Thornton followed his gaze and her expression soured. "Clara, do not just stand there gaping. Package Mr. She paused, waiting for him to supply his name. "Dalton," he said, still looking at Clara. "Jesse Dalton." "Package Mr. Dalton's bread properly," Mrs. Thornton finished with a sniff. Clara moved forward on unsteady legs, reaching for the brown paper they used for wrapping. Jesse Dalton watched her approach, and she felt suddenly self-conscious about the flour dusting her faded blue dress, the way her blonde hair had come loose from its pins, the tremor in her hands. She wrapped the loaf carefully, trying to work quickly despite her weakness. As she tied the string around the package, her vision darkened at the edges. She gripped the counter, willing herself to remain upright, but her body had other plans. The room tilted, and she felt herself falling. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. Jesse Dalton had moved with surprising speed for such a large man, and now Clara found herself cradled against a chest that felt as solid as bedrock. The world steadied slowly, and she became aware of Mrs. Thornton's shrill voice. "Clumsy girl. Mr. Dalton, I do apologize. She is always causing trouble." "When did she last eat?" Jesse's voice cut through Mrs. Thornton's complaints like an axe through kindling. Mrs. Thornton sputtered. "I am sure I do not know what business that is of yours. Clara is well fed and cared for." "She is half-starved." Jesse's tone had gone cold. He adjusted his hold on Clara, who was too weak and mortified to protest, and fixed Mrs. Thornton with a look that could have frozen hell itself. "How long?" "I caught her trying to steal bread not an hour ago," Mrs. Thornton said defensively, drawing herself up. "She works for room and board, and I provide both adequately. If she is hungry, it is because she is wasteful with her portions." Jesse looked down at Clara, who wished desperately that the floor would open and swallow her whole. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice gentler. "When did you last eat?" Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Monday, sir. A bit of porridge Monday morning." It was Friday. Jesse's jaw tightened beneath his beard, and Clara saw a muscle jump in his cheek. He set her down carefully in a chair near the window, then turned back to Mrs. Thornton. The older woman took an involuntary step backward. "You have her working here," Jesse said, each word precise and sharp, "baking bread that she is not permitted to eat while she starves. Do I have that right? She tried to steal a piece of bread she made with her own hands." Jesse's voice had dropped to something dangerous. "In my experience, Mrs. Thornton, when a woman is that hungry, it is not theft, it is survival." Mrs. Thornton's face had gone from red to purple. "How dare you come into my establishment and tell me how to manage my employees? Clara is lazy and ungrateful, and if you knew what I have put up with—" "What you have put up with?" Jesse gave a short, humorless laugh. He reached into his pouch and pulled out several bills, dropping them on the counter with more force than necessary. "That cover what she has earned working for you." Mrs. Thornton's eyes widened at the sight of the money. It was more than Clara would have made in 3 months. "I suppose it is adequate compensation," she said slowly, her tone calculating. "Good. She does not work for you anymore." Jesse turned back to Clara, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and confusion. "Can you stand?" "Sir, I do not understand," Clara began. "Can you stand?" he repeated, not unkindly. Clara nodded and pushed herself to her feet, though she had to hold onto the chair for support. Jesse picked up his wrapped loaf from the counter, then held out his free hand to her. "Come on," he said simply. "Where are you taking her?" Mrs. Thornton demanded, though she made no move to stop them. Her eyes were still on the money Jesse had left. "She has belongings." "In the back room," Clara said faintly. "Just a bag." Jesse nodded and guided her toward the back of the bakery, his hand steady on her elbow. Mrs. Thornton started to protest, then seemed to think better of it as Jesse's eyes met hers. They gathered Clara's few possessions, which fit into a single worn carpet bag: 2 dresses, a nightgown, a brush, and a small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring and a lock of her father's hair. When they emerged onto the wooden boardwalk that lined Charity Springs' main street, Clara felt the September sun on her face and realized she was shaking. It was not just from hunger anymore. Everything had happened so quickly, and she had no idea what would happen next. Jesse led her to a large bay horse tied to the hitching post. The animal was as impressive as its owner, with a glossy coat and intelligent eyes. Jesse secured Clara's bag to the saddle, then unwrapped the loaf of bread. He broke off a generous piece and held it out to her. "Eat," he said. Clara took the bread with trembling hands, but years of Mrs. Thornton's scolding made her hesitate. "Sir, this is your bread. I cannot—" "Eat it," Jesse repeated, his voice firm but not harsh. "All of it. Do not stop until it is gone." Clara raised the bread to her lips and took a small bite. The taste of it, simple wheat and salt, was so overwhelming that tears sprang to her eyes. She had baked thousands of loaves, but she could not remember the last time she had been allowed to enjoy one. She took another bite, then another, trying to eat slowly but finding it nearly impossible. Her stomach cramped, unused to being filled, but she could not stop. Jesse watched her eat the entire piece, then broke off another and handed it to her. "Slower this time," he advised. "You will make yourself sick otherwise." Clara forced herself to take smaller bites, and as the bread settled in her stomach, she felt strength beginning to return to her limbs. When she had finished the second piece, Jesse gave her a canteen, and she drank gratefully. "Ha, thank you," she whispered, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Sir, I do not know why you helped me, but I am grateful. I can work to repay you for the money you gave Mrs. Thornton." "Jesse," he interrupted, "just Jesse, and you do not owe me anything. But you gave her so much money, and you do not even know me," and Clara felt fresh tears threatening. The kindness was almost harder to bear than the cruelty had been. At least cruelty was familiar. Jesse studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. "I know what it is like to be hungry," he said finally, "and I know what it is like to have no one stand up for you. Consider it paid forward." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question that terrified her. "I have nowhere to go. I do not have family, and there are no other bakeries in Charity Springs." "You are coming with me," Jesse said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Clara's eyes widened. "Sir, Jesse, I cannot possibly. That would not be proper, and you have already done so much." "I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here," Jesse explained, his tone patient. "It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm. My sister Rachel lives there with me. She is married to a trapper named Thomas, but he is gone most months on the trap line. Rachel could use the company, and you could use somewhere safe to recover your strength." "Your sister?" Clara repeated, feeling a small measure of relief. If there was another woman, perhaps it would not be so scandalous. "Rachel's a good woman. She will be happy to meet you." Jesse glanced up at the sky, gauging the time by the sun's position. "We should get moving if we want to reach the cabin before dark. Can you ride?" Clara nodded. "I'm not very experienced, but yes." Jesse untied his horse and swung into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down to pull Clara up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, gasping at the strength in his grip as he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. She settled onto the horse's back behind the saddle, acutely aware of how close she was to Jesse, how warm his body was through the fabric of his shirt. "Hold on," Jesse instructed, and Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath her hands. She had never been this close to a man before, and her cheeks burned despite her exhaustion. They rode north out of Charity Springs, following a narrow trail that climbed into the mountains. The town fell away behind them, and soon they were surrounded by towering pines and aspens that were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine sap and earth, so different from the yeasty warmth of the bakery that Clara felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. Jesse did not speak as they rode, but his silence was comfortable rather than oppressive. Clara found herself relaxing against him, her cheek resting against his broad back as the horse's steady gait lulled her into a half-doze. She had not slept well in so long, and now, fed and away from Mrs. Thornton's constant criticism, exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Jesse was saying her name softly. "Clara, we are here." Clara lifted her head and blinked in the late afternoon light. They had emerged into a clearing where a log cabin stood against the backdrop of a steep mountain slope. It was larger than she had expected, well built with a stone chimney and glass windows that caught the sunlight. A vegetable garden stretched along one side, and Clara could see a chicken coop and a small barn behind the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the whole scene had an air of comfortable habitation. The cabin door opened, and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 30, with the same dark hair and strong build as Jesse, though her features were more delicate. Her face lit up when she saw her brother, then grew curious as she noticed Clara. "Jesse, you are back early," she called, hurrying toward them. "And you brought someone?" Jesse dismounted and helped Clara down, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow when she swayed. "Rachel, this is Clara. She needs somewhere to stay for a while. Clara, my sister Rachel." Rachel's sharp eyes took in Clara's thin frame and exhausted appearance, and her expression softened with understanding. "You poor thing. Come inside, you look ready to drop. Jesse, what have you gotten yourself into now?" "Saw a woman being mistreated," Jesse said simply, leading his horse toward the barn. "Could not walk away." Rachel shook her head with a mixture of exasperation and affection, then turned her full attention to Clara. "Well, you are very welcome here. Come, let me get you something more to eat and a place to rest. You look like you have been through an ordeal." Clara followed Rachel into the cabin, taking in the warm interior with wondering eyes. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace on one wall and a kitchen area with a proper iron stove. Colorful rag rugs covered the wooden floor, and curtains hung at the windows. Doors led off to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. Everything was neat and clean, with the lived-in comfort of a real home. "Sit, sit," Rachel urged, pulling out a chair at the sturdy wooden table. She ladled stew from a pot on the stove, the smell of beef and vegetables making Clara's mouth water, despite the bread she had eaten. "Jesse told me almost nothing as usual. Men, what is your story, dear?" As Clara ate the stew, which was rich and delicious and everything she had dreamed of during her hungry days, she found herself telling Rachel everything. About her parents' death, about Mrs. Thornton's bakery, about the bread and Jesse's intervention. Rachel listened with an expression that grew progressively more outraged. "That horrible woman," Rachel said when Clara finished. "I have half a mind to ride into town and give her a piece of my mind. Starving you while you baked for her? It is unconscionable." "Jesse already paid her," Clara said quietly. "More than I earned, I think. I do not know how I can ever repay him." "Jesse has more money than he knows what to do with," Rachel said with a wave of her hand. "He traps in the winter and does guide work in the summer, and he has a knack for finding gold in streams where others find nothing. He is comfortable, and he is generous when he sees someone in need." She poured tea from a kettle and set a cup in front of Clara. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. We have a spare room that is just sitting empty most of the time." "I do not want to impose," Clara protested weakly, though the thought of having a real room, a safe place to sleep, was almost too wonderful to believe. "Nonsense. I will enjoy the company. Thomas is gone until November, and as much as I love my brother, he is not exactly chatty." Rachel smiled warmly. "Besides, if you want to earn your keep, you could help me with the preserving. I have more vegetables and fruit than I know what to do with, and my back is not what it used to be from all the bending." Clara nodded eagerly. "I would be happy to help. I'm good with my hands, and I'm used to hard work." "I'm sure you are," Rachel said gently. "But for now, you need rest. Let me show you your room." She led Clara to a small bedroom off the main room. It held a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a dresser with a wash basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the garden toward the mountains beyond. To Clara, who had been sleeping on a thin pallet on the bakery storeroom floor, it looked like a palace. "There are clean nightgowns in the dresser," Rachel said. "Take whatever you need. I will wake you for supper, but if you sleep through, do not worry. You clearly need the rest." Clara thanked her profusely, then closed the door and simply stood in the middle of the room, trying to absorb the reality of her new situation. This morning, she had been a half-starved servant, and now she was in a comfortable cabin in the mountains, taken in by strangers who showed her more kindness in a few hours than Mrs. Thornton had shown in 6 months. She changed into one of the nightgowns, which was too large but blissfully soft and clean, then crawled between the sheets of the bed. The mattress was stuffed with what felt like feathers, impossibly luxurious compared to what she was used to. She had meant to lie awake and think about everything that had happened, but sleep claimed her almost instantly, pulling her down into a deep, dreamless darkness. When Clara woke, sunshine was streaming through the window, and for a confused moment she could not remember where she was. Then it came back to her. The bakery, Jesse, the cabin. She sat up, realizing with shock that she had slept through the entire evening and night. The sun's angle suggested it was mid-morning. She dressed quickly in one of her own faded dresses, plaited her hair, and emerged from the bedroom feeling shy and uncertain. Rachel was working at the stove, and the smell of frying bacon filled the air. Jesse sat at the table, mending a leather harness with steady, patient hands. "Good morning," Rachel said cheerfully, "or nearly afternoon. You slept almost 16 hours straight. How do you feel?" "Better," Clara admitted. "Much better. I'm sorry I slept so long." Do not be silly. Your body needed it. Rachel set a plate heaped with bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes in front of an empty chair. Eat. You have a lot of weight to gain back. Clara sat, acutely aware of Jesse's presence across the table. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his late 20s, with a weathered face that spoke of time spent outdoors and eyes that seemed to notice everything. There was a thin scar above his left eyebrow, and his hands, though large and calloused, moved with surprising dexterity as he worked the leather. "Thank you again," Clara said quietly, directing the words at him, "for everything you did yesterday." Jesse looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "You already thanked me. No need to keep doing it." "But you changed my life," Clara insisted. "You did not have to help me, but you did, and I want you to know that I am grateful." Something flickered in Jesse's expression, there and gone too quickly to read. "Any decent person would have done the same," he said gruffly, returning his attention to the harness. "Perhaps," Clara said softly, "but you are the one who did." Rachel caught Clara's eye and smiled, a knowing look that made Clara's cheeks warm. She focused on her breakfast, which was delicious and filling, though she had to force herself to eat slowly. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clara helped Rachel with the household tasks, learning to preserve vegetables and fruits for the winter, to churn butter, to tend the chickens and gather eggs. Rachel was a patient teacher and a warm companion, full of stories about growing up in Missouri and coming west with Thomas and Jesse after their parents had died. "Jesse was just 17 when our father passed," Rachel explained one afternoon as they worked together, peeling and slicing apples for drying. "He took on the responsibility of keeping us together and safe. Thomas had already been courting me, and he stepped up too. The three of us came west looking for a fresh start." She smiled fondly. "Jesse built this cabin himself mostly. Thomas helped, but Jesse did the lion's share." Clara glanced out the window to where Jesse was chopping wood, his axe rising and falling with mechanical precision. Even from a distance she could see the bunch and release of muscle beneath his shirt, the raw power in every movement. She had caught herself watching him more than once over the past few days, and each time she felt a confusing flutter in her chest that she did not quite understand. "He is a good man," Rachel continued, following Clara's gaze with a knowing smile. "Quiet and sometimes gruff, but good. He's not had an easy life, but he has never let it make him hard or cruel." "He's very kind," Clara agreed, feeling her cheeks warm. "You both are. I still cannot believe how much my life has changed in just a few days." "Sometimes that is how it works," Rachel said. "One moment, one decision, and everything shifts. Jesse has always been like that, acting on instinct when he sees someone who needs help. It drives Thomas crazy sometimes, but I think it is admirable." As September gave way to October, Clara felt herself growing stronger. The constant meals and good rest filled out her frame, bringing color back to her cheeks and shine to her hair. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, and began to feel like herself again, or perhaps like a better version of herself than she had been in years. She also became increasingly aware of Jesse. He was often quiet, going about his tasks with focused efficiency, but she learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight softening around his eyes when he was pleased, the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking hard about something. He treated her with careful courtesy, but there were moments when she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite name, something warm and searching that made her heart race. One evening in mid-October, after Rachel had gone to bed, Clara found herself alone with Jesse in the main room. She had been mending one of his shirts, a task Rachel had assigned her, and he was oiling his traps in preparation for the winter season. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Rachel tells me you will be leaving soon," Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence. "For the trap line." Jesse nodded, not looking up from his work. "In a few weeks. I will be gone most of the winter. It is good money, and the furs are best when the weather turns cold." Clara felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him being gone. "Is it dangerous?" "It can be. Weather's the biggest concern, and occasionally you run into unfriendly sorts. But I know the mountains well, and I'm careful." He glanced up at her. "You will be safe here with Rachel. The cabin is well stocked, and Thomas should be back in a few weeks." "I'm not worried about myself," Clara said, then immediately felt embarrassed. I mean, of course I will be fine with Rachel. I worry about you out there alone." Jesse's hand stilled on the trap, and he looked at her fully, his gray eyes intense in the firelight. "Why would you worry about me?" Clara felt pinned by that gaze, unable to look away. "Because you saved me," she said simply. "Because you are important to Rachel, and she has become dear to me. Because—" She stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence, unsure of what she was feeling. Jesse set down the trap and stood, crossing to where she sat. He was so tall that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because what?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I would be sad if something happened to you," Clara whispered, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. For a long moment, Jesse simply looked at her, and Clara saw something shift in his expression, a wall coming down, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. "Clara," he said, and her name in his deep voice sent shivers down her spine. "I need to tell you something." "What?" Clara breathed. "From the moment I saw you in that bakery, looking so fragile and brave, trying to hide how hungry you were." Jesse paused, seeming to search for words. "I could not walk away, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because I saw you and I felt something. Something I have not felt before." Clara's eyes widened. "Jesse, let me finish," he said gently. "These past weeks, having you here, watching you grow stronger and seeing you smile, hearing you laugh with Rachel, it has been the best part of every day. When I leave for the trapline, I'm going to think about you every day, about coming back to you." "To me," Clara repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "If you want me to," Jesse said. "I know I am not much. I live in the mountains. I spend months away from civilization, and I'm not good with fancy words. But I'm honest, and I'm loyal, and I would spend every day trying to make you happy if you would let me." Clara set aside the mending, her hands trembling. She stood, bringing herself closer to Jesse, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are not much," she said fiercely. "You are everything. You are strong and kind and good, and you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You stood up for me when no one else would. These weeks here have been the happiest of my life, and yes, a great deal of that is because of you." Jesse reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one large hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Clara whispered. "Please, yes." Jesse lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss started soft and tentative, a question more than a statement, but when Clara sighed and leaned into him, it deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her against his broad chest, and Clara felt safe and cherished, and wanted in a way she had never experienced. Her hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as if he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to leave," he said roughly, "but I have to. The money from this winter's trapping will set me up for the year, and I need—" He stopped, seemed to gather himself. "I want to be able to provide for you properly. I want to do this right." "I do not care about money," Clara said, her hands sliding up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. "I care about you. I know, but I care about giving you the life you deserve." Jesse kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips again, quick and sweet. "Wait for me, please. I will be back by March, sooner if I can manage it." "I will wait," Clara promised. "I would wait forever if I had to." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the fire burned down to embers and the mountain night deepened outside. When they finally pulled apart, Jesse walked Clara to her bedroom door, kissed her once more, and then forced himself to step away. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Jesse." Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her fingers pressed to her lips, her heart full to bursting. She had come to this cabin broken and afraid, and she was falling in love with the mountain man who had saved her. The next few weeks passed too quickly. Jesse prepared for his departure, checking and rechecking his supplies, making sure the cabin had everything Rachel and Clara would need for the winter. Rachel watched the growing connection between her brother and Clara with obvious approval, occasionally making comments about what a lovely spring wedding would be, which made Clara blush and Jesse scowl, though there was no heat in it. Clara treasured every moment with Jesse. They took walks through the golden aspens. She learned to shoot the rifle he insisted she know how to use for protection, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Jesse told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the hard years after his parents died, about his dreams for the future. Clara shared her own stories, the pain of losing her parents, her hopes of one day having a family of her own, a real home filled with love and laughter. "You will have that," Jesse told her one afternoon as they sat on a fallen log, looking out over the valley below. "I promise you, Clara. When I come back, we will start building that life together." "You sound very certain," Clara said, leaning against his shoulder. "I'm certain of you," Jesse said simply. "I'm certain of what I feel for you. The rest will work itself out." Thomas returned in early November, a wiry man with a quick smile and an easy manner. He greeted Clara warmly and immediately understood the situation between her and Jesse, giving his future brother-in-law a congratulatory slap on the back that nearly knocked Jesse off balance. "About time you found someone," Thomas said with a grin. "Rachel has been trying to marry you off for years." "I found the right person," Jesse said, his eyes on Clara. "Worth waiting for." Jesse left 3 days later, in the gray dawn of a November morning. Clara stood in the cabin doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the cold, watching as he secured his pack to his horse. When everything was ready, he came to her, pulling her into his arms one last time. "I will be back before you know it," he murmured into her hair. "Stay safe, stay warm, think of me." "Always," Clara promised, her voice breaking. "Come back to me, Jesse Dalton. Nothing could keep me away." He kissed her, deep and thorough, a kiss full of promise and longing. Then he pulled away, mounted his horse, and rode north into the mountains without looking back. Clara watched until he disappeared from view, then went inside to where Rachel was waiting with sympathetic arms and hot tea. "He will be fine," Rachel assured her. "He has done this for years, and he has never had such good reason to come home before." The winter months were long and hard. Snow fell heavy and deep, burying the cabin in drifts that sometimes reached the windows. Clara, Rachel, and Thomas settled into the rhythm of winter survival, keeping the fires burning, caring for the animals, rationing supplies carefully. Clara learned to snowshoe, to read the signs of coming storms, to appreciate the harsh beauty of the mountains in winter. But mostly, she waited. She thought of Jesse constantly, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he was as cold as she was. At night, she would lie in her bed and remember the feel of his arms around her, the warmth of his kiss, the certainty in his eyes when he promised to come back. Rachel, seeing Clara's anxiety, tried to keep her occupied. They spent long evenings by the fire, knitting and sewing, telling stories, and making plans. Rachel shared tales of Jesse's childhood, painting a picture of a serious boy who had grown into a serious man, but who had a capacity for deep loyalty and fierce protectiveness. "He loves hard, my brother," Rachel said one evening as they worked on a quilt together. "When he commits to something or someone, he is all in. You will never have to wonder where you stand with Jesse. He will show you every day." "I love him," Clara said quietly. It was the first time she had said the words aloud, and they felt both terrifying and right. "I think I loved him from the moment he told me to eat that bread, when he looked at Mrs. Thornton like he would move heaven and earth to protect me. Is that foolish, to fall in love so quickly?" "Not foolish," Rachel said with a gentle smile. "Some people know immediately. Jesse knew. I could see it in his face that first day. And I think you knew too, even if you did not let yourself believe it right away." Christmas came and went, marked by a simple celebration with roasted chicken and the precious oranges Thomas had bought in town months before. Clara thought of Jesse constantly that day, wondering if he was thinking of her, hoping he had enough food and warmth wherever he was. January was brutal, with temperatures that plunged below zero and winds that howled like wolves around the cabin. February was only slightly better, though the days began to lengthen, offering hope that spring would eventually come. Clara marked off each day on a calendar Rachel had given her, counting down to March. In early March, when the snow finally began to melt and the first brave crocuses pushed through the white, Clara's anxiety reached a fever pitch. Jesse had said March, but March was vast, 31 days of possibility and worry. What if he had changed his mind? What if something had happened to him? What if he never came back? "He will come," Rachel said firmly, the 20th time Clara voiced her fears. "Jesse always keeps his promises." On the 15th of March, Clara was helping Rachel hang laundry on the line they had strung between the cabin and the barn when she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped, and she dropped the sheet she was holding, shading her eyes against the bright spring sun. A rider was emerging from the tree line, broad-shouldered and confident in the saddle. Even at a distance, Clara knew that silhouette. She picked up her skirts and ran, her feet slipping in the melting snow, her heart soaring. "Jesse!" she called, her voice cracking with joy and relief. Jesse dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, and then Clara was in his arms, lifted off her feet, crushed against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt him shaking. "Clara," he said, his voice rough and broken. "God, Clara, I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Clara sobbed, clutching him. "Every day, every single day." Jesse set her down just enough to capture her mouth with his, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of 4 long months apart. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands in his hair, reassuring herself that he was real, that he was here, that he had come back to her just as he had promised. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me," he said. "I know I should probably court you properly, give you time, but I cannot. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you. Say yes, Clara. Please say yes." "Yes," Clara said immediately, laughing through her tears. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jesse kissed her again, then pulled her into another crushing embrace. Behind them, Rachel cheered, and Thomas whooped with joy. The commotion brought neighbors Clara had not even known they had, trappers and homesteaders emerging from their own cabins to see what the celebration was about. That evening, with the cabin full of friends and neighbors, Jesse produced a ring from his pack. It was simple silver with a small blue stone, clearly handmade but beautiful in its simplicity. "I traded for the stone in January," Jesse explained as he slipped it onto Clara's finger. "Spent my evenings by the fire making the band. I'm not much of a silversmith, but I wanted you to have something made by my hands." "It is perfect," Clara said, looking at the ring through fresh tears. "Absolutely perfect." They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony conducted by the traveling preacher who made rounds through the mountain communities. Clara wore a dress Rachel had helped her make from blue fabric Thomas had brought back, and Jesse wore a new shirt Clara had sewn for him. Rachel cried, Thomas grinned, and a dozen neighbors gathered to witness the union and share in the celebration afterward. When night fell and the guests finally departed, Jesse carried Clara over the threshold of a new cabin he had been building in secret with Thomas's help, while Clara and Rachel were busy with wedding preparations. It was smaller than the main cabin, but well constructed, with a large bed, a fireplace, and windows that would let in the morning light. "Our home," Jesse said, setting Clara on her feet in the middle of the single room. "I know it is not much yet, but we will add on as we need to." "It is perfect," Clara said, looking around with shining eyes. "Jesse, it is absolutely perfect." That night, in the bed Jesse had built with his own hands, covered by quilts Rachel and Clara had stitched together, Clara and Jesse came together as husband and wife. Jesse was tender and patient, mindful of Clara's inexperience, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. Clara marveled at the gentleness possible in such a large, strong man, the way his hands that could chop wood and set traps could also caress her skin with reverent softness. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Jesse's arm around Clara, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "I love you," Jesse murmured into her hair. "I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Clara Dalton." "I love you too," Clara said, the words coming easy and natural. "I have loved you since you told me to eat that bread, since you looked at Mrs. Thornton like you would tear down mountains to protect me." "I would," Jesse said simply. "I would do anything for you." And Clara believed him. The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. She and Jesse settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Their days fell into a rhythm of work and companionship, building their life together piece by piece. Jesse taught Clara to fish in the mountain streams, to track deer, to read the weather. Clara taught Jesse the finer points of baking, and soon their little cabin smelled as wonderful as any bakery, with bread and pies cooling on the windowsills. They remained close with Rachel and Thomas, sharing meals several times a week and helping each other with larger projects. In May, they planted a garden together, Clara working alongside Rachel, while Jesse and Thomas built a new hen house. In June, they went into Charity Springs for supplies, and Clara took fierce satisfaction in walking past Mrs. Thornton's bakery without a glance, her hand firmly in Jesse's, her head held high. Mrs. Thornton came bustling out when she saw them, her face a mixture of curiosity and malice. "Clara, I heard you had gotten married. Found yourself a mountain man, did you? I'm sure that's quite the step down from working in a respectable establishment." Jesse turned to look at her, and whatever Mrs. Thornton saw in his eyes made her take a step back. "My wife," Jesse said, his voice cold and clear, "is happy, she is healthy, she is loved. I would say that is several steps up from starving while baking bread she was not allowed to eat." Mrs. Thornton's face went red, then white. Several townspeople had stopped to listen, and Clara saw understanding and disapproval dawning on their faces as they looked at the bakery owner. Without another word, Jesse guided Clara past, and they continued with their shopping. "Thank you," Clara said quietly as they loaded supplies into their wagon later, "for standing up for me, again." "Always," Jesse promised, kissing her forehead. "For the rest of our lives, I will stand up for you." Summer gave way to autumn, and in September, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain, then told Jesse one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I am with child," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "You are going to be a father, Jesse." Jesse's face went through a series of expressions so quickly, Clara almost laughed. Shock, wonder, fear, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he said, his voice awed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Jesse pulled her into his lap, cradling her carefully. "Clara, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can hardly breathe. A baby. Our baby." Rachel was overjoyed at the news, immediately beginning to knit tiny clothes and plan for the birth. Thomas congratulated Jesse with backslapping enthusiasm and proceeded to tell horrifying stories about births he had heard about until Rachel threw a dishcloth at him and told him to stop terrifying the mother-to-be. The winter was easier than the previous one, with Clara safe and warm and surrounded by people who loved her. She crocheted blankets for the baby, sewed tiny gowns, and prepared the cabin for the new arrival. Jesse was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much, lifting too much, working too hard. "I am pregnant, not ill," Clara reminded him regularly, though she found his concern endearing rather than annoying. "I know," Jesse would say, "but you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I will not take chances." In late March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Clara went into labor. Rachel and a midwife from a neighboring homestead attended her, while Jesse paced outside the cabin like a caged bear, nearly wearing a groove in the ground. Thomas kept him company, offering whiskey that Jesse refused, saying he wanted to be clear-headed when his child arrived. After 12 hours of labor, as dawn broke over the mountains, Clara gave birth to a son. He came into the world wailing lustily, all pink skin and dark hair, perfect in every way. Rachel cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then opened the door to call Jesse inside. Jesse entered the cabin with the cautious steps of a man approaching something sacred. He sat on the bed beside Clara, who looked exhausted but radiant, and Rachel placed the baby in his arms. "Your son," Rachel said softly. Jesse looked down at the tiny bundle, and tears slipped down his bearded cheeks. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Clara, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked, reaching out to touch the baby's soft cheek. Jesse thought for a moment. "What about William? After your father?" Fresh tears sprang to Clara's eyes. "You remembered." "I remember everything you have told me," Jesse said. He looked at his son, his expression full of wonder. "William Dalton, welcome to the world, little man." William, or Billy as they soon began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's fine features, and both Jesse and Clara were completely besotted. Jesse, despite his size and strength, was remarkably gentle with his son, holding him for hours, talking to him in a low, soft voice, walking the cabin floor with him when he was fussy at night. "You are a natural," Clara observed one evening, watching Jesse rock their son. "I just want to do right by him," Jesse said. "I want him to know every day that he is loved and valued and safe." "He will," Clara assured him. "How could he not, with you as his father?" Life settled into a new rhythm with baby Billy. The cabin was filled with the sounds of an infant, crying and cooing and learning about the world. Clara and Jesse took turns with night feedings, worked together to keep the household running, and marveled daily at the little person they had created. When Billy was 6 months old, strong and healthy and already trying to crawl, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. Jesse's response was equal parts joy and concern. "Already?" he said, then immediately shook his head. "Not that I'm not happy, I am. But are you sure you are ready? Billy is still so small." "I am ready," Clara assured him. "And Billy will be a wonderful big brother." Their daughter was born the following spring, arriving quickly and with far less difficulty than Billy's birth. She was smaller and more delicate than her brother had been, with blonde hair like her mother and her father's strong features. They named her Sarah, after Jesse's mother. With 2 children, the cabin felt small, so Jesse and Thomas spent the summer building an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main living area. Clara and Rachel tended the children and the garden, preserved food for the winter, and enjoyed the companionship of sisterhood. "I never thought I would be this happy," Clara confessed to Rachel one afternoon as they shelled peas while the children napped. "When I was in Mrs. Thornton's bakery, I thought my life would always be small and hard and gray. But now," she gestured around, at the comfortable cabin, the sleeping children, the mountains beyond. "Now I have everything." "You deserve it," Rachel said warmly. "Both of you do. Jesse was lonely for so long, and you were lost. You found each other at exactly the right moment." As the years passed, the Dalton family grew and thrived. Billy grew into a strong, serious boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere. Sarah was bright and cheerful, with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. When Billy was 5 and Sarah was 3, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Michael and Emma. Jesse had to build yet another addition to accommodate the growing family, and the cabin that had started as a simple structure became a sprawling home filled with life and laughter. Jesse continued to trap in the winters, though he never went as far or stayed as long as he had before marriage. His family needed him, and he could not bear to be away from Clara and the children for months at a time. He supplemented his income with guide work and hunting, and the family was comfortable, if not wealthy. Clara baked bread, just as she had in Mrs. Thornton's bakery, but now it was for her family and neighbors, for trade and pleasure. She never took a bite without remembering that September day when Jesse had broken off a piece of his own loaf and told her to eat it all, the moment that had changed her life forever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jesse surprised Clara with a trip into Charity Springs. They left the children with Rachel and Thomas and rode into town, where Jesse had made arrangements for them to stay at the small hotel. "I want to take you somewhere," Jesse said after they had checked in and freshened up from the ride. He led her through the town to a building that had once housed Mrs. Thornton's bakery. The sign was different now, reading Miller's Bakery, and through the window Clara could see a different woman serving customers. "Mrs. Thornton sold the bakery 3 years ago," Jesse explained. "Moved back east to live with her sister. The new owner is a kind woman, Mrs. Miller. She treats her employees well and pays fair wages." He looked at Clara. "I thought you should know that the place where you suffered is now a place where people are treated with respect." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for telling me, and thank you for bringing me here. It feels like closing a chapter." "It is closed," Jesse said firmly. "That part of your life is over. You are Clara Dalton now, my wife, mother of our children, the heart of our home. The woman who was scolded for eating bread is gone. In her place is a woman who is loved and cherished and who will never go hungry again." Clara turned to him, cupping his bearded face in her hands. "I love you, Jesse Dalton. Every day I love you more than the day before." "And I love you," Jesse said, pulling her close. "From that first moment in the bakery until my last breath, I will love you." They kissed there on the boardwalk, in front of the bakery that had once been Clara's prison, and it felt like the final exorcism of that painful past. That evening, over dinner at the hotel restaurant, Jesse reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about what we want for our children." "What have you been thinking?" Clara asked. "I want them to have opportunities. Billy is smart and Sarah has such a gift with people. The twins are still small, but I see their potential already." Jesse paused. "I have saved money over the years, enough that we could send them to school, real school, if they want to go. Enough that they would not be trapped by circumstance the way we were." Clara felt her heart swell. "You would do that, send them away to school?" "Not away forever," Jesse clarified, "but for enough time to get an education, to learn skills and trades beyond what we can teach them. And then, if they want to come back to the mountains, they can. If they want to see the world, they can do that too. I just want them to have choices." "You are a wonderful father," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, "and a wonderful husband. Our children are so lucky to have you." "They are lucky to have you," Jesse countered. "You are the one who keeps us all together, who makes our house a home. You are the center of everything, Clara." They returned to the cabin the next day to find their children healthy and happy, if a bit wild from being spoiled by their aunt and uncle. Clara gathered them all close, breathing in the scent of them, feeling the solid weight of their small bodies, and thought about how far she had come. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Billy grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over much of the trapping and hunting work. Sarah proved to have a talent for healing and began studying with the doctor in Charity Springs, riding into town twice a week for lessons. Michael was fascinated by carpentry and worked alongside his father, building and fixing things with absorbed concentration. Emma had her mother's gift for baking and her father's head for business, and by the time she was 15, she was selling bread and pies to half the families in the area. Clara watched her children grow with pride and occasional heartache, knowing that someday they would leave, would build their own lives. But she also knew that Jesse had been right to give them choices, to ensure they would never be trapped by poverty or circumstance. On a warm evening in late summer, when Clara was 45 and Jesse was 51, they sat together on the porch of their sprawling home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Their children were scattered, Billy on the trap line, Sarah in town with a patient, the twins helping Rachel and Thomas with their own growing family. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked, leaning against Jesse's shoulder. "Taking in a starving baker you did not know? Changing your whole life for a stranger?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders, his other hand clasped with hers. "You were never a stranger," he said finally. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you. And regret? Clara, taking you from that bakery, bringing you here, marrying you, building this life with you, these are the only things I have never doubted for even a moment. You are the best decision I ever made." "You saved my life," Clara said softly. "No," Jesse corrected. "I gave you a loaf of bread. You saved your own life by having the strength to start over, to trust me, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what you had lost. I was just lucky enough to be there at the right moment." Clara turned to kiss him, this man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up, who had spent 25 years proving every single day that he loved her, who had given her a home and a family and a life beyond anything she had dared to dream. As they sat there in the gathering dusk, holding hands and watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky, Clara thought about that September day so long ago, the hunger, the shame, the bread she'd been forbidden to eat. The mountain man who had walked into Mrs. Thornton's bakery and changed everything with a few simple words. Eat it, all of it. She had eaten, and in eating she had found not just sustenance but hope. She had found Jesse, who had become her husband, her partner, her great love. She had found a home in the mountains, a family that filled her heart to overflowing, a purpose and a place in the world. The years ahead would bring more changes. Billy would eventually marry a sweet girl from town and build his own cabin near theirs. Sarah would become a respected healer, sought after throughout the region. The twins would find their own paths, Michael as a builder and Emma as the owner of a successful bakery in Charity Springs that became known throughout Colorado for its exceptional bread. There would be grandchildren, a dozen of them eventually, filling the cabin with noise and life and joy. There would be losses too, Rachel and Thomas passing within months of each other when they were in their 70s, leaving holes in the family that never quite healed, but taught them all about the preciousness of the time they had together. Through it all, Clara and Jesse would remain the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They would grow old together, their hair going gray, their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. Jesse would still chop wood well into his 70s, though not with quite the same speed and power. Clara would still bake bread, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still capable of creating loaves that were the best in the territory. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Jesse had walked into Mrs. Thornton's bakery, Clara would bake a simple wheat loaf. She and Jesse would sit together, and she would break off a piece and feed it to him, and then he would break off a piece and feed it to her, remembering the moment that had started everything. "Eat," Jesse would say, his voice softer now, but still holding that note of command that made her smile. "All of it?" Clara would tease, as she had teased for decades. "All of it," Jesse would confirm, his gray eyes warm with love and memory. Every last crumb. On a spring morning when Clara was 68 and Jesse was 74, Clara woke to find Jesse still asleep beside her, his breathing shallow and labored. She knew immediately that something was wrong and called for Billy, who rode to town for the doctor. But by the time the doctor arrived, Jesse had woken, and though he was weak, he was lucid. "Just old age," the doctor said gently after examining him. "His heart is giving out. I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do. It could be days or weeks, but—" He did not need to finish the sentence. Jesse lasted 2 weeks, surrounded by his family, holding Clara's hand. Their children came, and their children's children, filling the house with love and grief in equal measure. On his last day, Jesse asked everyone to leave except Clara. "I am not afraid," he told her, his voice weak but steady. "I have had a good life, the best life, because of you." "Because of us?" Clara corrected, tears streaming down her face. "Jesse, I do not know how to do this without you." "You will manage," Jesse said with a faint smile. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived starvation and cruelty. You built a life from nothing. You raised 4 incredible children. You will survive this too." "But I do not want to," Clara sobbed. "I want you to stay." "I want that too," Jesse said. "But we do not always get what we want. What we get is the time we have, and Clara, our time has been so good. No regrets, not one." "Not one," Clara agreed, leaning down to kiss him. "I love you, Jesse Dalton, in this life and whatever comes after." "I love you too," Jesse whispered. "My Clara, my brave, beautiful Clara. Thank you for eating that bread. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for everything." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes with a smile on his face and slipped away peacefully, his hand in Clara's, the mountain sunset painting the sky beyond the window. Clara mourned, as did their children and grandchildren and all the people whose lives Jesse had touched. They buried him in a spot he had chosen years before, on a hillside overlooking the valley, where the aspens turned gold in autumn and the wildflowers bloomed in spring. Clara lived for 12 more years, surrounded by her family, still baking bread, still telling stories about Jesse to grandchildren who hung on every word. She never remarried, never even considered it. Jesse had been her great love, her once-in-a-lifetime, and she was content to live on the memories of what they had shared. When Clara passed in her sleep at the age of 80, her children buried her next to Jesse on that hillside. Emma, who had inherited her mother's bakery, baked a simple wheat loaf and left it on Clara's grave, a tribute to the moment that had started it all. The story of the poor baker and the mountain man became a legend in their family, passed down through generations. The cabin they had built and expanded over the years remained standing, eventually becoming a gathering place for family reunions, where great-great-grandchildren would run through rooms where Clara and Jesse had loved and lived. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the pines just right, visitors to the cabin swore they could smell fresh-baked bread and hear the low rumble of a man's voice saying, "Eat it, all of it." It was, after all, a love story that had started with bread and grown into something that fed not just bodies, but souls, across generations and years. It was a reminder that kindness matters, that standing up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves can change the world, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places and endure beyond death itself. Clara had been scolded for eating her own loaf of bread, but a mountain man had told her to eat it all, and in that moment of defiance and care, everything had changed. Two lonely people had found each other, built a life together, created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. It was, quite simply, the best kind of love story, one that was real, hard-won, and absolutely worth every moment.